Guys, today we are looking at Houston basketball ahead of the 2024-25 season, and Coach Kelvin Sampson has a good squad again, and he's coming off of 3 straight 30-win seasons at Houston, and entering his 11th year at the program, he's really built it into a national powerhouse. And I thought last year Houston was one of the top 3 teams in the country. I thought there was a clear tier with them, Purdue, and UConn. Obviously, it kind of panned out that UConn was probably in a tier of their own. But I think also some of that is injuries with Houston. You start with the injury in December that hurt their depth with Terrence Arsenault going down with a torn Achilles. And then as we got closer to the tournament, Big Joe Tugler went down with another injury. Juwan Roberts wasn't healthy. And then obviously in the Sweet 16 game, Jamal Shead turns his ankle. And while as a Duke fan, I did think the tide was starting to turn. And I can't say that Houston would win that game 100% of the time with Jamal Shead. It's probably like 80% of the time if he was healthy, they win that game. And they advanced to the Elite Eight. And I think at the Elite Eight, if they have a healthy Jamal Shead, they beat that NC State team. So I think it's unfortunate for Houston the way the year ended last year. They went 32-5 overall, 15-3, which was first in the Big 12. They went 2-1 in the Big 12 tournament before losing in the final to Iowa State, partially due to injuries, partially because Iowa State just played amazing in that game. And then, like I just said, in the NCAA tournament, 2-1 with an amazing second round win over Texas A&M, which went to overtime, and then the Sweet 16 loss to Duke. So let's move into the roster here with Houston as we look ahead to this coming season. So who's gone, who's back, and who's new? Who's gone? Obviously, the big one, Jamal Shead. And listen, you can't replace a guy like this. Like you just can't. I mean, I guess in theory you could, but I just think in theory it's easier said than done. And he was the leader of this team. He was their best perimeter defender. He was their really only playmaker. If you look at last year's stats, no one averaged above 2 assists besides Jamal Shead, which says a lot about the reliance that they had upon him to create plays for others. And he could also, get his own offense as well. And it's going to be really hard to replace him. Damian Dunn is the other rotation player that they lost from last year. Came off the bench mostly, played about 18 minutes a game, was solid and dependable for Coach Sampson. Now, who's back? They've got a ton of the roster back, and I think that's going to help them this upcoming season. LJ Cryer, Juwan Roberts, Emmanuel Sharp, Javier Francis. You got 4 of your 5 starters back. You've got your 2 outside shooters, and you've got your 2 big men who are back. Francis, your defensive specialist. Roberts, your interior scorer. And then, LJ Cryer is a really good offensive player. And Emmanuel Sharp is a guy who I think if he didn't take so many tough shots, his efficiency numbers would look better. But he's one of those guys like, J.R. Smith, where I feel like it's almost more appealing for him if the shot is more challenging than if it's a simple catch and shoot opportunity. Now, where this Houston team I think is going to be, what makes them intriguing, I will say, is the guys I mentioned earlier who are coming off of injuries in Terrence Arsenault and Big Joe Tugler. And the reason being, I think these 2 guys, along with one guy we'll get into who's new, are going to be key factors with the ceiling for this team. Arsenault, we're going to have to see how he responds coming off the torn Achilles. I like the fact that it was in December, so he's going to have almost a full year to recover. Saw an interview with him this summer, and he said basically he's fully rehabbed. The only thing that's left, and this was in June or July, is just getting the confidence back in his body, and so he can feel confident in taking off, etc. So I feel like he's in a good spot to start the year. And then Joe Tugler, I think I know they've got Javier Francis and Juwan Roberts ahead of him. I feel like Joe Tugler is their most skilled big with the highest potential. And so it'll be interesting to see how he develops. And lastly, Malik Wilson, who was another rotation guard off the bench last year, similar to Damian Dunn, is back for Houston. Now, who's new? I mentioned before there's a new player who I think is going to be really important for Houston. And I think if you're a Houston fan, you know who I'm talking about. It's Milos Uzan, the transfer point guard from Oklahoma. He's a 6'4 guard, and he averaged 4 assists per game at Oklahoma, around a steal per game, and he has the unenviable task to replace Jamal Shead, in my opinion. And listen, I think he's a solid player, but no one's Jamal Shead. At the college level, at the very least, it's going to be a tough mountain for him to climb, and it's not going to be just him. It's going to be LJ Cryer doing a little bit more playmaking. Maybe they get a little bit more from Juwan Roberts playmaking inside. Maybe Arsenault gives them a little bit more. It's going to be a team effort. And then freshmen, they brought in 2 notable freshmen in Mercy Miller and Chase McCarty, who were ranked respectively 55th and 97th on 24/7 Sports. Miller is more of a combo guard at 6'4", while they list McCarty as a wing at 6'5". He was 200 pounds on 24/7 Sports. He's 220 and 6'6" on Houston's official website. So I know sometimes the school websites beef up those numbers, but I also know sometimes guys, just get bigger going from high school to college. So that will be an interesting development. But I think now is an appropriate time to start looking at the projected lineup and rotation. And if you've enjoyed this video so far, please give me a like, subscribe to the channel. It really helps me grow. So, starting lineup I think is pretty simple. We're just going to sub Milos Uzan into that Jamal Shead spot. LJ Cryer, Emmanuel Sharp, Javier Francis, and Juwan Roberts will round out the starting lineup. And then we've got at spots off the bench, as I mentioned earlier, the 2 key guys in my opinion, Terrence Arsenault and Joe Tugler. And then guys in the spots 8 and 9 I think will be Malik Wilson and Mercy Miller, at least to start the year. Now, I'm not 100% certain if that's exactly how it's going to be in the beginning, because they may want to work in Arsenault a little bit slowly at the start of the season. But I think that's where they'll get to by the end of the year. Now, as we move into the schedule and predictions for Houston basketball, I think, this is going to be a good year for Houston, but I'm not sure it's going to be a great one. And here's why. So non-conference, they've got Auburn, Alabama, and Notre Dame. Sorry, they've got Auburn in a neutral site game, and then they'll play Alabama, Notre Dame, and Rutgers in the Players Era Festival in Las Vegas. And then they'll take on Butler at home in the Big 12 Big East Challenge. And I think they'll go 9-2 in non-conference play. Last year, they were undefeated. Now, in conference play and home and away games, they'll take on Baylor, Kansas, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, and West Virginia. Only at home, they'll have BYU, Cincinnati, Iowa State, TCU, and Utah. And on the road, they'll take on both Arizona schools, Colorado, Kansas State, and UCF. And last year, like I said at the beginning of this video, there's 2 less games in the Big 12. They went 15-3. I just think the loss of Jamal Shead is going to be a factor. So I think I have them going 14-6 in the Big 12. I think it's right. It's either the Big 12 or the SEC for the best conference in the league. And when you lose your leader off of last year's team, I know I've said this a lot in this video, it's going to have a big impact. And while I hope they do better than what I have, 23-8 is still a solid season. But coming off of 3 straight 30-win seasons, it's certainly a step back. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. How do you see Houston faring this coming season? If you're not a Houston fan, let me know what team you are a fan of, and I will profile your team ahead of the season. We've got a little over a month until the start of the college basketball season. And if you've got a friend who likes college basketball, tell them to come check us out here at Jack Banks NBA. See you next time. Peace.